What's going on, you guys? Today we're going to show you how to do the timing on a VG30DE TT. Currently my engine is already torn down partially, but we have not done any timing component yet. It'll be easy for me to throw everything back on that needs to be done so I can show you guys what to do. It's very easy to overthink this process. The only difference obviously is yours is probably in the car, and I'll tell you what you need to remove first and roughly where it's at. So here's the engine that we're going to tear down and show you guys how to do timing on. This is what I consider a 60 to 120K service right here. You got valve cover gaskets, knock sensor sub harness, the upgraded one, which is completely sealed, your tensioner, you've got your VTC springs, thermostat, we've got a rear main seal down here, we've also got our cam seals and a crank seal. Got a water pump, both of our idler pulleys, your crank gear, and your timing belt. Before we get started, for you guys who are doing this with the engine in the car, normally I recommend pulling the radiator out and the fan shroud. Obviously you got to pull the fan shroud, but I like to leave them together as one unit to make it a little bit easier. You're going to have to drain all your coolant anyways, so you may as well just take your whole radiator out. This is your underguard. You'll have two 10 mil bolts up here in the top, and I believe you also have these three right here, which are either on your subframe, your front subframe, and this tucks in to the one by the radiator support. This one could just be totally under the engine. I haven't ran one in a while, so it's kind of hard for me to remember, but it'll be pretty self-explanatory once you get under there. This isn't the right fan shroud, but to remove the fan shroud, usually you got one on an NA that's right up here in the middle, and you have 2, 3, 4, 5. There's screws. This is a twin turbo radiator, and it appears it only has a couple on the sides. Step one, I would say, is to crack this loose and drain all of your coolant out, so that way you just get a head start on that. As soon as that's done and you're able to, pop this hose off to fully drain your coolant out. What you'll do is from underneath, once you remove your shroud, you will have a under shroud like this, and all you have to do is just pull it off. There's just clips. This one isn't the same as the Z. They clip going this way, so you can use a flathead, or what I do is I just pull the bottom one out, pull it down. It comes out every time. Once you have the lower hose off the radiator, you can remove this one. Even though you don't have to yet, you can just let it drain. Remove this and this. Wait till it drains for a second, so then you'll have no coolant in this hose and it won't be as messy. Remove this, and then you can pull your radiator straight out and not have to worry about the fan. Then we get access to the fan. To remove the fan, you just use a 10mm wrench. Then at that point, go ahead and remove this hose. Remove both your intake pipes. You'll have 8mm, sometimes they're 10mm T-bolt clamps if you have aftermarket stuff. You'll have your overflow hose, your cam angle sensor. Once you pop this little cover off, you'll have a connector clip underneath of that. After that, pull back these little wiring harness retainers, remove the spade connector, remove your coolant temp sensor, and then remove the 4 8mm bolts from your PTU and pull all of that stuff over out of the way. Now you're pretty much going to be where I'm at, doing it outside of the engine. I'm just going to give you a better way to visualize it, looking straight on at the engine, so you kind of know what you're looking for or feeling for down there when you're doing it from up here. The reason I don't recommend this single-handedly, so I can do every other bit of maintenance, because let's be honest, they're 30 years old, they probably need it, and so I don't have to sit here and bend over this car trying to work down here. It's just not fun to me. Now that we have access to everything, if your engine's in the car, put it in 5th gear, chalk your wheels, put a breaker bar down here with a 27mm socket, and remove your crank bolt. Luckily, mine's already loose. and I'm going to show you guys what tool you need to remove that. Honestly, you can just go ahead and cut all your belts, because odds are you bought belts with your kit. And I don't have my power steering pump, my alternator, or my AC compressor on. Those are all pretty straightforward with the tensioner set up. Right here you'll have a bolt going through that secures it. You'll want to crack this loose between your pulley, that way your power steering pump can swivel. Crack the mount bolt loose. You'll loosen the 12mm adjuster nut, and then you'll loosen the 12mm adjuster. And if the bolt just goes out and it doesn't swing, hit it with a hammer or something and wiggle it over. Crack this loose. Here's your tensioner. The bolt for the tensioner's on the back, the adjuster's down here on the side, and the mount bolt is right here. Go ahead and pull this off because it's held on by the fan. This is one of my trusty tools for the Z32. Before you start to remove the pulley, you need to loosen the crank pulley bolt almost as much as you can. Next we have our pulley with 2 bolts, and what we're going to do is put the point here and the 2 bolts here. Snug up your bolts. Now we have a 14mm that we're going to tighten. As you tighten it, it's going to pull this pulley off of the crank, which you can see we just threw our wrench down. As you can see, it created a gap and it's pulling it off. When you remove the crank pulley, do not lose this woodruff key because you need it to put your crank pulley back on. What I always like to do, put the bolt back in because we're going to need it to crank the engine over to get it to top dead center. Next, we're going to remove these coolant pipes. To remove these, you'll have 2 12mm, and then you have 4 6mm Allen keys, or Allen bolts I should say. Once you remove those, pull your bottom thermostat pipe off first. Make sure you have something to catch all your coolant. Now remove your pipe. Now that you have that removed, you'll have 2 hose clamps here and 1 back here. Usually it's down on the bottom side. Once they're out, go ahead and work it back and forth and use itself on the coolant bypass hose to work the other side off. Because odds are they're pretty corroded and crusted on there. Yuck. Once you have that off, we can work on our timing covers now. So we'll do this one first, and to remove this you need a 5mm Allen key and an 8mm socket. You'll have an 8mm here, down here, right here for your right hand side. Then you have Allen key here, 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 here. Allen key, here, 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 and I believe here. Nope. This is a short 8mm, and that's the 2 for this side. Let's remove those. Now that we have access to the lower cover, you have 8mm here, here. You have your short 8mm bolt here. This is a different one from the rest. You have one up here, here, right here, and that's it. There's actually 6. I always like to pull down, get this tab on the outside of the power steering pump. Once I do that, I will wiggle this side up to get as much clearance that I possibly can. So then I see this gets close, and I'll squeeze it and pry it down and outwards to pull it past this water pump. As I just moved it over, pop that off, and I can wiggle that out. As you can see, they're both flat and not bent. Now that we have access to your engine, you can go ahead and pull these off. Remove your water pump. You'll definitely want to have a pan for this. I've already drained this, so that's what's already leaking here. See, even though I drained it, it's still leaking. Throw it in the bin. Go ahead and remove your cam angle sensor or crank angle sensor. 3 12mm bolts. Don't be like me and damage your cam gear prying your overly and corroded cast bracket off. Since we have to remove the intake, we're going to do that now. You've got 8 bolts here. Yes, there's a bolt right here. Bracket on each side. You got 6 coil packs on both sides. You got a ground here, a ground up here, and you've got idle air control hose on the side, brake booster hose, assorted vacuum lines, and your PCV, which will be here on both sides. Remove each of them. Pull that plenum off. Let the plenums off. Go ahead, remove both of these brackets on each side. There's 4 12mm bolts. You get them out. Take this off. Loosen your 8 valve cover screws. Take that off. The reason we did that is we're actually going to have to use a wrench or an adjustable wrench up here on our cam to hold our cam gear still while we loosen the bolt and while we torque the bolt on. Before we do that, we're going to set the car to top dead center. To do that, you will just crank over your engine until this mark lines up with that dimple behind. This mark lines up with the dimple behind, so on and so forth. It doesn't have to be exact. It's just a reference point. Please, guys, stop stressing it out. It's not as complicated as you think. It's just straightforward, not complicated. You also have a mark that you can see with the white paint. Actually, it's one mark behind the gear with the white paint. That has your timing mark. You'll want to line that up with your indentation right here. Once you got it roughly to top dead center, everything should just be in the general area of them dots. What I like to do is to try to hold the belt so that way it doesn't spin, and I take my breaker bar and I try to break it loose without moving from top dead center. You want to be able to have the bolt out because you will have to remove this cam sprocket. Before we remove this, here's a note to self. You see how this little spacer is tapered outwards? Sharp side is here on the inside. That's because it keeps this belt in line down here. Later style engines have 2 of these flat ones because the lower timing cover goes through the bottom. What I really like to do before I remove the belt is take an 11mm socket and crack all of these exhaust cam gear bolts loose. They're only on there like 12 to 15 foot-pounds, so they're very easy to break off. And actually just hold this gear while you crank that bolt off. Now that your exhaust cam gears are loose, what I like to do here is crack your adjustment nut down here, crack this bolt loose, and crack this adjuster bolt as well. Loosen them up and you'll see all the tension pull out of your tensioner. Next, just remove all 3 of them bolts. There we go. Throw it in the garbage. Odds are your belt probably just jumped off and whatnot. No big deal. Just go ahead, pull it off carefully. Doesn't really matter. Now, take this, throw it in the trash. A lot of people freak out when this happens. Watch this. Usually, like, this cam gear spins slightly, like this one. It's at rest right now at top dead center. This one, it's not. This one is not. So what you can do here is sometimes you'll be moving it and it'll snap one way. You see it snapped all the way to the left. You see that? We're not at top dead center anymore. Oh no, let's freak out. Our engine's toast. No, it's not. Just relax. That's what happens. The cam is at its resting point. There's no valves hitting any pistons. As long as you don't move your crank, you don't have to worry about that. Since you already have these loose, go ahead and just remove all your bolts from your cam gears on your exhaust side and remove the cam gears. Like so. Now this cam's a little rusty. What I like to do is coat it in oil so you get a better sealing surface the next time around and it cleans up the cam. And you just let it soak. Remove both of your idler pulleys now, which they're just 2 14mm nuts. And you take both of those, throw them in the garbage. We're gonna take it, throw it in the trash, because I damaged it. To get your cam back into place up to top dead center, You can see it's at resting position now because it spins. You can take it, just grab it real tight, pull it up, now it's into place. It doesn't matter if it goes either way, guys. Seriously, don't stress it out. I see too many people in the group freaking out because their cam gear snapped one way and they think they ruined their motor. First thing we'll want to do here, remove your 4 7mm screws. What I like to do is remove these two and then back these two out evenly while I put pressure on this cap to keep the spring from popping the cap off. Get to a point where I can put pressure on it to keep it even. Remove the screw. And now we go back and do the other side. Then it'll pop off. Don't drop any of that like I did. A lot of people probably have different ways of doing it. This, I believe, is a 17mm bolt. What I like to do here is on that spot that I showed you on the back of the cam that has a spot for a wrench, I use an adjustable wrench because I don't have the appropriate size wrench. Yeah, I know I should probably have one. But what I like to do here, and it's never let me down, I know some people may cringe at this, but it has worked for me and it has worked plenty of times, so I'm not worried about it. What I do is I'll fold up a rag, just keep folding it over a couple times, make sure it's like an actual rag, a towel rag, not like a paper rag, and you stuff it in the head, the direction that you're going to be turning, and then position your wrench, slightly move your cam so you get the most bite off your wrench that you can. I like to take my big breaker or torque wrench, breaker bar on, and really I like to hold pressure on the wrench at the same time, but really it will just smash into this rag, and as you torque it off it will just tear a hole in your rag at worst. I've only had one barely mess with the inner casting, and it really wasn't even bad. There, we got it loose. Make sure you have a tight adjustable wrench. Unless you have an actual wrench, you'll be way better off. See, all that happened to the rag was it just smashed it. Drain some of your oil out before you make a mess everywhere, and then set it on a rag or something. This bolt, adjustable wrench. This bolt, 10mm, 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 10mm. Remove this timing cover plate right here, and then do the same for the other side. It'll have 4 10mm as well, and this one bolt right here that's just like this bolt. Now we have all of our timing covers off, front, rear, all cam gears, front stripped down totally except these. And then you have 2 10mm bolts on each side. Just knock those off. You'll clean them up to reseal them. I apologize ahead of time if the neighbor's mower's too loud. I haven't been able to catch a break out here the past week. Everyone's mowing at a different day. Since we have all that off, our next step is to do cam seals, and this is what we need. Seal puller tool. This is a Lyle tool that I got online, and it's been my favorite so far. What I like to do is kind of find about where this little where this is going to be in placement, so we can get a clean pull, and then tighten it up as much as you can because you don't want it moving. Now you'll hook that as far inside to the inside of your cam seal as you can, because there is a metal ring on the inside. Try to be careful while you're in here too, because the last thing you want to do is damage your cam. I'm starting to wonder if these have ever been changed. These are pretty tough, to say the least. There we go. Got a good enough of a bite, and it squeezed right out. Your exhaust cam seals are a little trickier. What I like to use is this little pick, and I like to kind of take my tool, get the rough estimate, so I know about where I'm starting to, or where this is going to be placed. And I like to poke a hole away from the cam, pry that spot in between both of the holes outwards to tear enough of the seal off that I can fit my tool in. Oh yeah, that one actually came out way easier than the others. Here is your cam seal that we're going to use to reinstall in this location. What I usually like to do is clean out the surrounding area with a rag. Any residual pieces of the cam seal and potentially any excess oil down there. Lube it up with some oil so you can get it to install nice, smoothly and evenly. Always kind of pull one lip to the side and work it around until I can get it all around the cam, because you don't want to fold that inner lip over on accident. Then once you get it on, you can slowly work it back. You can take your old seals, preferably the one you have the least damage on, put it backwards so you have a flat space on a flat space. And you see how snug that these cam seals fit. You can just keep layering them on. And to do that, I'll put an extra layer right here, put a piece of wood on the outer side of that, and I'll tap it inwards. You want your seal to be as flush with this surface here as possible. You don't want to push it in, you want it flush. Turns out I don't have a block of wood, but I got a brick. You can use it to evenly tap in your new seal. Screwdriver method, you can kind of focus the area that you haven't pushed all the way in as well. And even. And ready for us to do the other three. So we're going to do those. Like I said, if not, you can always use the hammer method here or get an actual seal installer kit. Now that you've got all of your cam seals in, it is a perfect time to clean all of this before you start to assemble stuff back together. Reason being is you're never going to have as much room and access to get into all this stuff as you will right now. What I like to do is scrape all these ports off, get them cleaned up, then take my wire brush, clean them up the rest of the way to where they're good for sealing. Same for the water pump. Both of these housings here, hit it with some brake cleaner. Actually let it soak, and then as it soaks, keep spraying it. You can see that completely cleaned that spot. Once you get your area all cleaned up, I use a wire brush. Like I use a drill on here because it's cast iron and I don't have to worry about tearing into the aluminum. But once you are all done cleaning that up, give it one more spray with brake cleaner to get all of your RTV and all your little chunks of dust, dirt, and grime. So we can have a clean area to work with down here. What you need is you're going to need an angle grinder or cutting wheel so you can remove your crank sprocket. If you're very lucky, yours will just slide off. However, usually that is never the case. Usually there's C's stuck on. The other method is to drill and tap on both sides and use a puller to pull it off. That's so you can reuse the gear. If not, just spend the 60 bucks on the new one. You're gonna notch that gear slot that goes right above the woodruff key. So that way when you cut it down enough that you can smack it with a punch or chisel and you can snap it in half and pull it off. I'm not sure if you guys just heard the tone change of that hit, but we have cracked the gear all the way back. You can see it cracked to the rear timing plate or cover. Spray some PB Blaster to loosen up that corrosion or rust. Let's slide it off. Wow, that's awfully rusty. I've never seen one that red with rust before. Chuck your gear in the trash. Now that you have access to your crank seal, what you're going to do to remove it is do the same thing that you did up here. Use a pick to pry part of it out, get a place where you get access to poke your tool in, and remove it. Got our new crank seal in. We cleaned up a little bit of our oil pumps and how it at least looks aluminum. Totally assuming that you guys have cleaned up all of your parts for the front of your engine. Now it's the time that we start to reassemble it. First step is this rear timing plate. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, and your 1 bolt at the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 bolt at the bottom. Before you put your timing covers on, I recommend to clean these and to put RTV on them. Just put a bead on it, smear it all around. I use ultra gray for nearly everything except the oil pan. Smush it on, hand tight, let it sit for an hour, cure, then torque it down. They're like not even 5 foot-pounds of torque. You barely have to put any pressure on them. I just snug them up. Put them on before you put your timing covers on, because if not, those rear timing covers will make it much harder to access these outer bolts. Let's RTV our water pump so we can hit 2 birds with 1 stone. And now we've got water pump and these 2 pipes on. Now let's get our rear timing covers on since we got these pipes on, and let's start to dwindle down our stack of new parts and assemble them to start pulling this engine back together. Now that our timing covers are on, what we're going to do, we're just going to start plugging some stuff away so we can get rid of some parts over here on the table. Our timing tensioner, place it right there. Let's grab our crank sprocket. So I like to take some oil, get it on the crank, and I like to smear it all around so we can get it nice and coated, lubricated, to where it'll make the gear slide on easier. And hopefully make it come off easier next time. Do not forget this washer. This must go on before the crank sprocket. This is the outside of the gear because you can see the timing mark. All you gotta do is line your woodruff key up with the crank sprocket. So I like to install the woodruff key right here, because once you get this on and started, your woodruff key in the front will force it on the one in the back. Take your hammer or mallet and start to push the crank gear on. Since we just used a 2x4 and a hammer to put this on, we're just going to blow it off with air and then rinse it with a brake cleaner. Now our crank gear is installed. Now we can focus on putting all 4 of our cam gears back on. Now that the gear's on, we'll just slowly snug down each of these bolts. As for this intake gear, we are just going to tighten these back down. You're going to use the same method up here with the wrench and the rag to get it to stay stationary while you torque it. Personally, I don't torque these down until the timing belt is on. Your intake cam gear torque spec is 90 to 95 foot-pounds of torque. These 10 to 14. If it's different, I'll correct it. TC caps back on, which are these. You want your replacement spring and your O-ring, so you can replace that spring and O-ring that go inside of that unit. I do like to put some oil down in the groove so it holds the O-ring in place. While you push this down, tighten 1 bolt on each side so that way you can hold it there to thread the other ones in. Give it like 1 foot-pound of torque. That's it. Don't force it. These things are tiny. They don't need that much. Last step before belt installation, install both of your idler pulleys or idler bearings. The torque spec of both of your idler bearings is 32 to 43 foot-pounds. I always run it at 43. Now that everything is assembled and torqued, go ahead and grab your timing belt and remove it from your packaging. Before you install your belt, this dotted line will go on your passenger side exhaust cam. What you want to do before you install this belt is you want to count how many cogs or teeth there are between that line and this line, and this line, and this line, this line. Last but not least, this line and this line. You should have 24 marks between your passenger exhaust and intake cam. You should have 45 between both of your intake cams. And between here in your crank mark, there should be 59 cogs. Check your belt, make sure if your belt is correct, then you can use your lines to line up on each of these and you'll be okay. Sometimes these are made wrong and it just happens. That's why you got to check this first. Now we've confirmed all of our teeth count are correct. Let's go ahead and start laying it across the engine. You may have to rotate the engine over slightly to move a certain cam to get a good enough slack or tension between the two. Like I just had to rotate this slightly to pull the slack between these two so that way I can stretch the belt the rest of the way across. We're one tooth off up here. We're going to try to spin this over. Yeah, this is the one. Your driver's side cam's at rest, so you can spin it ever so slightly. Now we got that mark lined up. This gear moves ever so slightly. Let's line that up. Now what I like to do up here to keep this belt from coming off is I like to lay some kind of heavy tool across it. Usually holds pretty good up here on the top. So now this is one of the trickier parts. Arguably sometimes you want to start down here, because as long as you got this mark straight and on, and the rest of it just falls in place. We do have to reinstall our bolt here so we can turn this over. All it takes is to snug the bolt on just a little bit to get to the point that you can spin the crank over just a little bit. You barely even need to move it. Our teeth are actually lined up on the dots. So what I like to do is try to make as most of your slack right here as you can. And by doing that, I pull up on this and I'll slightly turn the engine over just to make up all of that slack. Now that it has a bite, what you want to do with your tensioner right here, you want to have your lock washer and nut right here ready to go. Get most of your bolts threaded in all the way, and you want to pry, you want to push inwards on your tensioner, and at the same time you want to thread this last bolt in on this adjustment end. Since this is the first time around, I'm just going to leverage this a little bit before I can take all the slack out of the engine by turning it over so we can make our tensioner a little bit tighter. I got the tensioner about where I think it'll be. Just start to snug all 3 of your 12mm bolts down. Once you have one bolt tight, you can go tighten the other, move your screwdriver and whatnot. Alrighty. Now, first things first, what you want to do is remove your little set bolt that's right here in the side of your tensioner. At least just loosen it all the way so you can allow your piston to push your tensioner outwards. With nothing on the motor, what we're going to do here is we're going to turn it over counterclockwise. What I like to do is the first stroke is I like to really yank it so I can try to tighten this bolt down so that way we can use it to spin it backwards to be able to go back to top dead center. Like that. Usually that's all it takes. You just punch it real quick to where you're not cranking it over. And now what we're going to do, spin the engine over 720 degrees. What I usually do is spin the crank 720 degrees. That's really one full rotation on the rest of the engine. That should be enough to pull all the slack out from around the engine and put it right here on your tensioner. After you do that, you need to wait 5 minutes, spin it over one more time, and read your tensioner. Once you read your tensioner, it should be 3.5 to 5.2 millimeters, and that's to factory spec. So you can see how tight I set it. Now that we are about to spin the motor over, let's see how much slack it takes up within like 1/8 of a turn. See, it's slowly starting to open up. So now let's turn it over 2 full rotations. You should know if you've done a full rotation because all of your cams should be back at top dead center. Your crank has to spin a full 2 times to get 1 stroke up at the top. Now that we've cranked it over, this is about our gap. Your sweet spot is your 4mm Allen key. So what you're going to do here is take this, see if you can fit it in between this gap. And you want to get it as close to 4 mil as possible because it's right in the middle of that sweet spot. Now we've let it sit for 5 minutes, so let's go ahead and spin it over another 2 times and check where our tensioner's at. Oh man, I don't know how well you guys can see that. Look, it literally slides right in. It's perfect. It's right at 4mm. Oh my gosh. Well, you guys, I've always heard and seen people do this in videos and whatnot. I've never had it happen to me. This is the first time I've ever set timing for the first time on my actual first try. I'm totally blown away. Go figure, it's for the video. Usually I have to do it 3 to 4 times. It's not a big deal. Whenever you do this multiple times, what you want to do is try to find the sweet spot of where to tighten in this bolt and set this tensioner. To me, it's about 2mm. Then I like to put force, maybe 15-20 pounds of force up here towards the tensioner, tighten it, and usually that recipe gets me pretty close to the ballpark. This time it actually just worked perfectly for us. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and back this crank bolt out so we can remove this bolt and put our washer back here. Before you're totally finished and before you put everything back together, remove the bolt from your tensioner. Last thing you want to do is for this bolt to work its way out, to fall down here and make you skip a tooth of timing. Grab your curved timing washer and put the curved side towards the timing belt. That's what's going to keep the timing belt in line. If you put it the other way, it's just going to start chewing up your belt. You're going to smell rubber, want to know what's happening, and then you're going to be back to do this all again. The reason I like to put the belt on before I do this is because I don't have to worry about it jumping. I don't have to take the valve cover off and put a wrench on the cam. Well, you guys, I think I just decided we're going to make this in a 2-part series. Reason being, we just finished doing the full timing kit and everything that needs to be done for a 120K kit. However, I have my own version of what I like to do and everything else that goes with it. So I think we're going to split this up into 2 parts. We're going to do the crucial one first, and then what I recommend next. In the next video, if you're still stuck and need to know how to put everything back together, stay tuned for it and we will leave where we left off. However, I believe anyone that has been able to make it down to this point is going to be able to make their way out. I mean, yeah, I didn't explain really how to do these, but that's kind of self-explanatory. So with that being said, you guys, this is going to be the end of the video. I hope I really helped you guys out on how to time your VG. I told you guys pretty much every little tip and trick that I knew. I included pretty much everything that I had questions with at the beginning. I was overthinking literally everything. The way I looked at it is you get one of these tooth off and then your valves hit your pistons and your engine's toast. I was not in a position to lose like that back then, so I was really paying attention and I was very scared to do this. Don't be intimidated, it's not that bad of a job. Just use common sense and you'll make it through. I hope this video helped you guys out, and if you guys liked the video, don't forget to drop a like, comment, and subscribe down below. Let us know what you think, and we'll catch you in the next video, you guys. Peace.